I love the phrase curate it, because one of the other things you talk about is actually spending more time with the happy people, so that you take in their energy, celebrating their successes. I mean, how wonderful. Who doesn't want to do that? And the questions are starting to come in, so that's great. Do type those in and we'll weave some in. Alex says, is the opposite true of the booster effect if you do not have a supportive childhood?
Yes and no. So generally speaking, the opposite is true, right? So sensitive people will struggle more in stressful circumstances, all else being equal. And because they have access to the boost effect, they can certainly build in things to provide sources of support, even if they're going through a very stressful circumstance. But that's not easy for children to do. So you can kind of overcome that struggle of the kind of the opposite of the boost effect. But with children specifically, what we see, I mentioned earlier that being sensitive is genetic, and it is largely genetic. But there is an upbringing component to it too that shapes how sensitive you ultimately become. And the two do different things. Your genes kind of put you in a ballpark, right? They put you in either the general category of average, low, or high sensitivity, and you'll probably stay more or less within that category, based on your genes, no matter what happens in your life. But there are certain circumstances that increase sensitivity and make kids more sensitive as they develop. And there are two circumstances that do it, and they're the extremes. So it happens in the very best of environments, the very most supportive, most calm, most loving environments. The kids tend to become more sensitive over time, because why wouldn't you? Why not soak up as much boost effect as you can? But it also happens in the most abusive and most traumatic environments. And that's also true later in life. You can slightly increase your sensitivity if you go through, like refugees coming from a war-torn country will often go up slightly in sensitivity. But children especially will, if they're being abused or in some other really terrible circumstance. And the reason for that is your sensitivity makes you highly alert to lots of threats. You're using that deep processing of a sensitive mind to predict, well, when dad does that, that's when he usually gets angry afterwards. So if I see him do that, that's when I'll kind of leave the room or go hide or go outside. So it's an unfortunate reason, but kids will become more sensitive actually to have better outcomes from their childhood if they're going through that kind of thing. With that said, the vast majority of sensitive people have a middle of the road average upbringing, just like most people in general. It's only a smaller effect that comes from your childhood upbringing.
Let's talk about what sensitivity isn't. And there are a couple of questions that have come in. Someone asked, is sensitivity associated with people who are quiet? And let's also use the introvert word there. And then Christian says, where does the oversensitivity spectrum end and the autism spectrum begin?
Ooh, these are such great questions. Oh, I love this. I love this. Yeah. So we'll do the two separately. So in terms of being quiet or being an introvert, so first off, I'm a very loud person. Like I have to watch out when I'm on podcasts and recordings because I don't just like blow out the mic levels with like how loud I laugh. But I am a sensitive person, just loud. So no, not necessarily. A lot of sensitive people are introverts. A lot are extroverts. And I think the best way to look at it is introversion is a social orientation. It's about where you get your energy from. You get your energy from alone time, that's an introvert, or from time with other people, being social, that's an extrovert. Sensitivity is an orientation towards your environment. So sensitive people will struggle in environments that are chaotic and overstimulating and loud and hectic, but they will do really well in calm environments where they have lots of space for that sensitive mind to do its deep processing. And that's true whether those environments are social or not. So this is maybe the easiest way to understand it. If you think of a sensitive extrovert, there are plenty of them out there. Sensitive extroverts will love their people time. They will get their energy from being around people, but they have to be very careful not to do that in overstimulating settings. So a sensitive extrovert might hate going to a huge networking event with 200 people in a conference space because it's just overstimulating, even if they love the people. Instead, they might fill up their social calendar by every single night of the week, I'm getting dinner with 2 or 3 or 4 friends, and I rotate who it is, and we have deeper, more meaningful conversations. And we do that at like a quiet restaurant instead of a loud bar. So that would be a good example of a sensitive extrovert. Two different things. Autism is interesting. So I think autism also has this overstimulation component. Both sensitive people and people on the autism spectrum can get overstimulated easily. but it's for different reasons. And an example I like to give is sort of if you find yourself breathing really hard and really rapidly, it might mean you're having a heart attack, or it might mean you just finished your morning jog. There's different reasons that could cause the same thing. And there is, I think, a lot of interest in potential overlap between these two traits. And to be clear, I think just by bad luck of the draw, historically, autism has been labeled as a diagnosis or a disorder. I think that there's a really strong, wonderful movement right now that says, no, this is a healthy trait, and we should not consider it a disorder. Sensitivity, just by pure luck of the draw, was labeled as a healthy trait. But I don't think that either one is better than the other. I think they're both an important part of neurodiversity, and they both have a valuable role to play in humanity. But the brain activity is very different. And there's been studies that looked specifically at this. And there's a lot of ways in which the autistic brain acts different than the highly sensitive brain. But probably one of the most noticeable is in terms of social cues. So autistic individuals have a difficult time, generally, on average, interpreting the social cues of neurotypical people, at least if they don't have some practice or some tools to help do so. Highly sensitive people, that's their first language. It's like they're fluent in social cues. They just understand instantly what someone's saying or means before the person even finishes saying it. So, and we see that at the brain level in those areas related to social interactions.
Let's talk about sensitivity and leadership, because you've gone in to talk to Google and PayPal and Amazon and so on about the benefits of having sensitive leaders. What have you told them?
Yeah, this is, there's two different, I think, messages that that companies and leaders need to take about sensitive people. The first one is, if you are leading a corporation or any kind of organization, there's some evidence out there that suggests that the sensitive workers are the people who are both the highest performers as rated by their managers, and also the most stressed out of your employees as rated by themselves. So there's a mismatch there where these high performers, and it makes sense they would be high performers. These are people who think things through carefully. They don't rush a decision. They're very thorough, and they're wired to be creative and innovative. You couldn't get a better worker than that in many, many fields. So these very valuable, high performing individuals, there's something that our companies are doing that's not serving them. It's causing them to feel extremely stressed out. So you might be causing your most important, most valued employees to burn out and want to leave faster than they otherwise would. So that's the first message for leaders to take, is we need to change the environment we give our workers if we want to retain those highly sensitive, high achievers. The second thing is leaders themselves. I think there's an image that leaders need to be cold, callous, tough, and just willing to make really fast decisions, kind of shoot from the hip. And what we know from decades of research on leadership is that that is actually a very ineffective leader. It's not just an unpopular leader. Of course, people might not like working under that kind of leader, but they also just are terrible at doing their jobs. They don't get the performance out of a company that other more compassionate leaders can get. And that makes sense if you think about it, that when you are able to pay attention to the emotions of people around you, understand what they really mean, think about their concerns, think about what motivates them. And sensitive people are masters at this. They have a natural ability to rally and inspire other people. Sensitive people are also driven by a sense of purpose. They themselves don't want to do a job that doesn't seem to have a bigger purpose behind it. So when they're in leadership positions, they are very careful to make sure to be spelling out to the team at all times, here's the reason we do this. This is why this matters. And that brings people together. It makes people want to be part of that team and want to stay a little late and want to give their absolute best work because we're doing something that's important, and they can see that connection. So sensitive people bring entire teams or entire organizations together, united around a vision. And that's how they achieve greater things. And that kind of leader tends to be higher performing. We've seen this in study after study after study. The best leaders tend to be a little humble. They tend to be very focused on asking the input of a lot of other people before they make decisions. They don't make fast decisions if they can avoid it. They don't shoot from the hip. That's a way to make bad decisions. Instead, they ask a couple of experts, a couple of members of the team who will be doing the actual work. Maybe they call a couple of friends who they trust their opinion, and they start to look at data and research, and they pull it all together and say, wow, I think this would be the best path. And they get just better output.
So that we'd all love leaders who are going to be wonderful like that. If for us as employees and sensitive people, how can we take responsibility in making sure that the environment that we work in, the job that we work in, is the best one for us, if you like? I mean, you mentioned sense of purpose, but also just in terms of the environment, and what you call job crafting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing to remember is that you have a lot of power as a worker, and you can, one important tip for if you're in an environment that's not working for you as a sensitive person is if it's just like small things that you could maybe figure out a solution for, great. But if it's toxic, if the entire work culture is just exhausting you every single day, or if you're stuck working with a specific person or under a specific manager who is just a terrible fit for you, you can leave. We can't always leave right away, but like there is not shame at all in looking for a different job and quitting, even if you've been there 6 months, a year, whatever it might be. Find an environment, a work environment, look at the work culture especially, that's going to feel a little more conducive for your success. But within a job, I think for one thing, talk to your manager, talk to your boss. And you don't have to ask for a bunch of accommodations or get them on board with what being sensitive really means. You can have a very simple, very reasonable conversation that goes something like this. I'm fairly sensitive to my environment, and so I do my best work when there's no distractions and when I can just focus on one thing. What are good times during the week that I can schedule a block of time to do that? And that's a reasonable ask. And any halfway decent managers can say, oh, yeah, we could find some time on your calendar that you can just turn off email, turn off notifications, and focus on one thing, because they know they'll get a better product out of it at the end. So once you have permission to do that, you've started to take control of your work environment. You can do it in small ways too. Everyone knows wear noise canceling headphones, but that's a Band-Aid at best. You need to start making changes to the way you work and the way you're expected to work. And those reasonable conversations can pay off. But job crafting is something that researchers have come up with that is basically a way to start to build meaning into a job that might otherwise feel meaningless. And it's not a Jedi mind trick. You're not just tricking yourself into thinking your job's meaningful when it's not. You're actually creating meaningful work and meaningful sources of work into your existing job. So that happens in many ways, but it often involves going outside of your job duties and going above and beyond your job duties. Now, if you just blow off your job duties and do something different, no one's going to be happy with that. But if you're doing your actual core job duties, but you're looking at, here's something I'm really interested in that's outside of my job, maybe I'll go talk to the person who does that and see if there's anything I can be doing in my role that supports that. Or maybe this is something that our company is not doing right now that I could do to start to improve things. And you can ask permission sometimes, but oftentimes it's a permissionless thing, right? If you, there's a wonderful example that comes from one of the researchers that she was working at a hospital and she wanted to find she was doing the study at a hospital. She wanted to find the workers who feel the deepest sense of meaning in their work. And the ones who did were, especially, there was this janitor, right? You think of the janitor as maybe the person who might feel that their work is the least meaningful, is the way you would often think of it, right? They're kind of at the bottom of the ladder. But when she talked to this guy about why he had rated his job as being so full of meaning, it wasn't just because he was cleaning the hospital. It was, for one thing, because he thought of it as, I'm making this a sanitary environment to kill germs and to help these people stay infection-free and recover. So I'm doing something that contributes directly. It's almost as if he's part of the healthcare team. I'm in charge of sanitizing this, sterilizing it for everyone's health. But he also did little other things. So he would, he worked in like the brain injury and kind of coma ward. And so he would do things like moving the artwork. When he finished cleaning for the day, he would go and switch which paintings were in which patient's room, because he thought that, maybe on the off chance that these different types of stimuli, different painting every day, will help stimulate the brain more and help them move toward recovery. And he just did that on his own. He didn't ask for or need permission, and it wasn't a problem. And he would also make connections with patients' families and get to know them, and to the point that there were patients who were discharged who, ended up corresponding with him by letters long after they were out of the hospital. So he was finding ways that he was not just cleaning a room, but making a difference in people's lives. And you can do that same thing as an information worker, an office worker. You can do that same thing as an executive or a leader of a company. The way you'll do it is different, but it's those ways of finding sources of meaning that go above and beyond what you were assigned to do.
There are so many insightful vignettes within your book of individual stories of people who've made a difference in that way or their own experience. Some of them I know have come from the Sensitive Refuge website, but also stories. It's beautiful storytelling. So Carmen has a good question. How can a sensitive person deal with a rude person?
Is it wrong to say be rude back? I guess that's the wrong answer, right? No, I don't mean that, but I think there's a grain of truth to that. So sensitive people, if you have that strong sense of empathy, you have a very hard time saying no to people, oftentimes, as a sensitive person, because you don't want to disappoint people, you don't want to let them down, you don't want to be the rude person. So sensitive people, I think a struggle for us is that we often allow people to trample over our boundaries. That can be in big ways, but can also be in small ways, like just the way someone speaks to you, which could be very rude or even verbally abusive. And the most empathetic thing you can do in that circumstance is to have empathy for yourself, to have self-compassion, and to be very clear about your boundaries. And there is nothing wrong with saying, look, you don't get to speak to me that way. So I'm going to leave this conversation now. And depending on what the exchange is, if it's coworker, it's like, when you're able to talk to me in a different tone, then come have a conversation with me. Or, we'll address this by email, or we'll address this at tomorrow's meeting, whatever it might be. But if it's a family member, if it's a friend, it might be a different conversation. If it's a stranger, very different conversation. But you are not being more sensitive and warm and caring by not having boundaries. And you're certainly not being more compassionate or nicer by not having more boundaries. You're actually being very cruel to yourself. So absolutely, do have boundaries, do speak up for yourself. What's the sensitive way to do that? Just don't slap them.